Hello, everybody. This is Gary Fowler. It is great to be here one more time today. I'm the CEO, president, and founder of GSD Get You Done Venture Studios, a premier AI and quantum venture studio located in the heart of Silicon Valley. I'm a 17-time serial entrepreneur with several unicorns under the belt. I was on the original management team at Click Software, which is sold to Salesforce for 1.35 billion, and also Eva.ai, one of the first generative AI companies pre-transformer models that I founded with Dr. David Yang in 2016. We believe at GSD that intellectual capacity is evenly spread around the world, but opportunities are not. With that, I have an incredible guest today. I'd like to introduce Rafi Moshe. Rafi is the CEO of StoriedLife, and I'd like to bring him on board to talk a little bit about StoriedLife. So, hi, Rafi. How are you today?
Great, Gary. How are you?
Good. So Storied Life's a digital platform that combines intuitive storytelling with AI assistance so to help individuals, especially seniors, capture their stories in a really, truly meaningful way. And so you're really guiding them through series of prompts and questions and interactive features. So, you know, Rafi, in terms of your own origin story, how did you get interested in this? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so there's a personal angle to this. Both my parents are Holocaust survivors, and they both have a very varied experience. And my dad, even though he had a difficult childhood, had a lot of actually very funny and interesting stories to tell. He always asked me to kind of sit with him and write this down. He's not a good writer. I'm not a good writer. When I look at the platforms out there, they're very lacking. Most of them require writing skills. And when ChatGPT came out, especially the 4.0 model, and we did some experiments, we realized that there's an opportunity here to turn ChatGPT into a real personal biographer that actually guides interviews. Because one of the challenges with seniors is they either don't say enough or they say too much. So you actually need to actively listen and guide the conversation, and then do the heavy lifting of turning a conversation into a story.
So, you look at it, and the importance of stories as a way to make others, understand our experiences is quite interesting. So, you put a lot of emphasis on storytelling. Why are personal stories so important?
Well, in a way, each one of us is a story or a set of stories with a master story around it all, right? So, and stories is really kind of the way our brain makes sense of the world around us, what happens to us, and even how we make sense of ourselves and the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. So it's a really deep thing. And it's very interesting that we know when something interesting is happening in our life, and we'll typically reach for a phone and try and grab a visual, a picture or a video. And we know that we're not actually capturing the really interesting stuff that is behind that picture. And that's why we almost never go back to those pictures. So there's lots of apps and lots of ways to capture visuals. There's almost nothing that actually makes it easy to capture the meaning, to capture the story behind things. And that's why we focused on that.
So you're right. Stories shape how we understand ourselves and the world around us. I mean, it allows us to really reflect on our personal growth, right? How we go over challenges, celebrate achievements. And sometimes, quite frankly, it's called, in psychology, we used to call it vicarious learning. You watch
Mm.
somebody else do something, you learn it. And for seniors, the act of being able to share and reflect on those stories is really, deeply therapeutic. So, what was an interesting story that your father told you that you'll never forget? If you can share that.
Yeah, there's so many. The thing is, actually, most of them are funny, despite him going through the Holocaust. So he has a story, for example, where he had his grandmother living with them, and he was not supposed to leave the house. So he actually lured her into a basement, into where they stored food, and he locked her in there and went swimming in the river for the day.
Oh,
And yes, so that's the kind of dad I grew up with, is a big prankster. And of course, because they had such a good relationship, she actually never told his parents about that. So that was kind of something between them. So there's lots of, there's just so many
great.
of these things.
That's what we used to call those hellions back in Pennsylvania.
There you go.
Stuff like that. So, Rafi, so, what challenges do seniors face in trying to record or tell their life story? And we know there's technological challenges, right? The technology barriers. But what are the other challenges that they have?
Yeah, there are just so many. And we learned so much through just seeing how people use the product. And so, of course, we knew that there's a writing gap there. So that's the whole purpose of why we're approaching things the way we do. But aside from that, a lot of seniors think that they don't remember much. So the idea of having a conversation where you know how you want to start, but you don't know where it's going to go, it's almost always revealing things that they forgot, they thought they forgot. So so there's this issue of memory and kind of probing and asking the right question and leaving things open and giving them space and time. So you can't rush people. You have to really understand where they are and give them time to recollect. Um, some of them, there's a lot of psychology around you. Some people don't start because they think maybe nobody's interested, but or their life is not interesting enough. But when they start talking to sort of this effectively a small light therapist, and when we turn that conversation into a story, they realize there's so many things in their life that to them seem mundane or regular because they just experienced them, and yet for others, when they hear it told back to them in a different voice and words that they didn't have for themselves, suddenly it sounds interesting. So there's this amazing sort of process of self-discovery that they go through. So, and then of course, some people maybe try to hire an interviewer that's anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000. So most seniors can't afford that, and that's why we wanted to give something for everybody. So it's the issue of cost, the issue of privacy too. So a lot of them would not sit with a stranger for an interview, but if you gave them a phone and a companion, they open up in a way that they would never around other people. So there's lots of these sort of barriers that we had to deal with in the way that we approach things.
It was interesting because I went out to the Church of Latter-day Saints and to the archives out there where you can get in and look at your history, your family. And I got to tell you, once you go into it, you start to look at the past. And in fact, Melissa and my friend Randy got us in there to go through it. And there was actually notes in there. I didn't know my grandmother, that she had that the sister she had was a half sister, and I didn't know she had a half brother. And it was quite interesting because what it said to me, which is mind boggling, is that my grandmother, who was she was a Greek born in Egypt, but actually her grandparents on her mother's side were Dutch, right? And Italian. In fact, he was a diplomat. And when you start to hear these stories, and her mother was married, have married before, and her father or husband got killed in a bike accident. He got hit by a car. And it was the most amazing thing when you're living these journeys. So, I mean, when you do that, it brings meaning to your life, right? It's like Viktor Frankl, right? Man's Search for Meaning. So with that, how do you monetize it? How do you go down through and monetize StoriedLife? Because it sounds like a great thing, but, how do you take it from this freemium model to something, how do you make it robust so it really becomes exciting?
Yeah, so our approach right now, for a short period of time, because we're still collecting feedback and improving the platform, we're still making it free for early adopters. But this is going to be a freemium model in terms of subscription at the range of, depending on which platform, which subscription you take, will be between $15 and $20 a month. So we obviously, that's one way to monetize. The other is that we're going to be providing an easy way to print your final book, like a hardcover book. So there's a little bit of a monetization there. But there's other things that we've discovered that through this process. So beyond the subscription to actually create your book, there is a benefit to leaving that content on our platform, so we can link your book directly back to the original conversations for the next generations. And we are going to take your content and allow your grandkids to continue interacting with the content as a digital twin, so that there's a way for them to, instead of always having to reach out for a book, they can literally ask a question, how was it growing up in Romania in Eastern Europe during the war, for example?
Now, you're going to actually have a digital twin, like physical digital twin, because I've done some of those myself.
Yes, yes.
In my face, and it was uncanny, actually.
It is, and this is why that's partly why it's still kind of at the R&D stage internally. It's not that the technology is not ready; the technology is ready, but how you introduce it and how you make it available to people. For example, whether you focus on just the chat side as opposed to try to mimic the person. We are still kind of working on that and what's the right way. It's really about the psychology of it rather than the technology of it. The important thing there is not just to know the story, like the actual content, but actually infer other things like the personality traits or attitudes toward decision making and risk taking, which are all things you can get from a conversation. So it's not just about the content, it's about how a conversation goes. So there's a lot that goes into it, and we're working on that as we speak.
You look at the market right now, there are a lot of startups that have focused on seniors, obviously with the aging population. But the senior demographic generally, except in Africa, is growing faster than any other age group. Then, you look at it, you've got increased tech adoption. But something, Rafi, well, as we talked about this, I wrote some notes myself. And, the main thing is when we go back to this, what we talked about, Viktor Frankl, right? People are looking for meaningful connections. It really grounds them to the past. It gives them this sense of meaning. Why are they here? How do they, where did they come from?
Yeah, and sometimes, unfortunately, I talk to and deal with a lot of seniors in senior care homes in various ways, retirement communities and so on, and you see so much loneliness. And it's not just the physical loneliness that they, let's say, don't have as many people to interact with, but in a sense, some people, depending on their life experience, they're a little disconnected from themselves. And when you have a private companion where you're actually opening your mouth and talking maybe about some things that were a little difficult, when you hear it back told to you and you have a way to reframe things in a healthier way. And so I've noticed that it tends to kind of give people a better sense of self, a better sense of well-being, just through the fact that they went through it in a safe way and found new language for their experiences. So there's the loneliness from other people, but there's also the disconnection from yourself that for a significant portion of seniors is an issue.
The one thing that's, and you're right on target with it, look at it, if you look at this, when you're dealing with any AI project, there are always hurdles, right? We just talked about it with digital twins, etc. And what are some of the biggest challenges in developing StoriedLife's AI?
So there's the technical aspects of it. I mean, obviously the technology changes so quickly, literally every day. So for us, in terms of the architectural product, we have to be flexible enough and platform agnostic enough so that we can always leverage the best that is out there, and that literally changes on a daily or weekly basis. So we are continuously testing, improving, and so on. You're never locked in on one technology. That's one thing. And then there's the whole aspect of how do you make the technology comfortable enough for this very challenging demographic of seniors. So, there was a lot of training that we had to go through with the LLMs and so on, so that, for example, they're non-judgmental enough, they're empathetic enough, but not in an inauthentic way. So, for example, an LLM often has a tendency to try to prove to you that it understands you by repeating what you said. It doesn't look authentic. So there's a lot of little things like that in terms of communication skills. They also, you want to make sure that the LLM doesn't try to solve your problem. If you're talking about something difficult, it has to be more of a therapist that kind of listens and holds space for something, as opposed to implying that there should be a solution for something difficult, right? So there's lots of things that have less to do with the technology and more with the application domain and the kind of role that you want it to take. And then, of course, there's, seniors have challenges, some physical and cognitive challenges. So the user interface has to be right. It has to be simple. Fonts have to be, buttons have to be big. It's just the kind of good practices for user experience. Those are some of the challenges we continuously have to deal with and improve.
I was looking at it, and I wrote a couple of notes down myself, and your AI really needs to handle nuances and things like language and dialect, cultural references, because you got users from diverse backgrounds. So if you got somebody from Romania dealing, and then at the same time, somebody from China, vast differences. And then, make it easy to use, because you got to make sure that those AI driven prompts, remain intuitive and not intrusive, because you would turn the people off, right? If they're too intrusive, they might you get offended or scared, actually.
Absolutely, absolutely. So part of what we do is we learn as we're having more conversations with you, and it's not just that. If so, for example, we can make connections as you're talking about a particular topic. We can infer connections to other things you may have talked about in the past and bring them into the conversation. That's one thing, but you also have to notice kind of what's not being said. So, for example, if you ask in that might be gender specific and may not, but some people are more comfortable talking about how they feel about something that happened, and some people don't want to talk about the feeling, they just want to talk about what happened. So if a couple of times we ask them about how they feel and they change the conversation to something else, we have a way to infer, maybe we shouldn't ask so much about feelings with this particular person, or maybe we have to wait for 3 or 4 more stories before we approach personal experiences, right? So there's lots of this that you kind of have to learn as you go, right?
No, I agree. And then, you look at it, you mentioned that seniors have unique needs. What's different or unique about developing this for the demographic?
Well, I think trust is a big thing. Trust is important for everybody, but especially with seniors, because I always tell my parents, don't click on any link in an email, don't disclose too much information. So this is a little challenging in a sense that you're asking.
Don't buy any gift cards for freaking Macy's. There's nothing, Hudson's or whatever, because nothing good's going to happen. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I want 10 gift cards, and you make sure they're $50 a piece. Make sure to send these things and give me the numbers off the back. Yeah, right.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's almost like we're asking them to do the opposite of what they're being asked to do usually, and so you have to do it, slowly. And often we appeal to the children to kind of get the permission and make sure that they're involved in the process, so that there's no surprises there. So I think for us it's important to make this a family project, so that they're part of it, and that's kind of the way that we try to gain trust and support for the initiative.
Well, I mean, the other thing is accessibility, right? Because the larger text, easier navigation, instructions have to be, clear so they understand them, and then don't give them a lot of jargon on the technology side, because they may or may not understand it. It's
Absolutely.
So, you look at this, look into the future. What is going to happen? Where's StoriedLife headed next? And, how do you really, it's not just about capturing the environment today or the legacy from yesterday. Where else can this be used?
Yeah. So, in terms of where we're going, we support, aside from English, one of the features that people love most is the fact that we support 58 languages. Some of our best users, English is not their first language, because they're not used to being understood so well in their native tongue. So we've gotten great feedback from a lot of countries like Germany, the Philippines. So we could internationalize this and make this available in different countries. That's one way for us to grow. We also can take and produce other products out of this content. So yes, we're producing books, but we can take the same content, and we started doing work where we can turn it into a 45-minute video about your life, because we include stories and photos right now. So that's a fairly kind of easy thing to put together in segments, obviously, today with the current technology. And the other thing that we noticed is people love talking to our biographers. So initially they start because they have a goal in mind. I want to get a book out of it, but they enjoy the process. The endorphins are starting to move, and so it becomes less about getting to an end point, and they just enjoy checking in and talking about the next thing. And there's almost a little bit of a disappointment when they get to the end. So for us, it'll be natural to take this and turn it into kind of a daily companion for seniors, because if we know the deep story of you, and unfortunately maybe your spouse is no longer here, it would be good to have somebody that really knows you and what you care about, and have you talked recently to your son in California, and have you checked in with your neighbor across the hall that you guys like to play bridge together once in a while? Just have somebody that has your interest in mind. He's not trying to sell you anything, just wants to make sure that you engage with life and the world around you on a daily basis. So that's kind of another thing that we can do. And the other thing that we are, I can see this growing into is right now we have a platform where you can tell your own story. But we can repurpose the same platform into a life celebration. So in a wake or a funeral, imagine that 100 people get a text message with a link when they just have a conversation about the deceased. He was my high school friend and we stayed in touch. And you talk about a couple of things that you guys, the fishing trips you used to do together. You had a couple of pictures of you, together on, fly fishing. And now imagine now you have your dad's life experience from 100 perspectives, right? So that's something that I can see storytelling growing to. In kind of the broader sense, what we're trying to do and hoping to do with this is really to kind of influence a cultural wave where we allow ourselves to look at ourselves as a story, or as a set of stories that we can be proud of, stories that we can connect with in the family, so that we have a common language and a good understanding across generations. It's one thing that I've noticed more and more. The more you kind of tell your story, the more you're connected with the next generations, the more they can relate to you, and they have something interesting to talk about. It doesn't have to be anything big. It could be that you liked to dance in a polka dot dress in the 50s, and it turns out that your 6-year-old granddaughter loves polka dot dress. Now you have something in common. So life, it doesn't have to be big moments. It's those little things that create connections.
You look at it, and I see this, and the core offerings about capturing and sharing personal legacies, but I'm thinking about like therapeutic and wellness services, those areas where you have mental health professionals being able to use this. I mean, as a psychologist, it would have been great guided storytelling for therapy, or reminiscence, therapy, to be able to guide them through. I remember with my father, when he had a stroke, when I started talking about the past, we actually broke him out of having the stroke issues where he was non-communicative, and I actually started talking too much, and not in a bad way, but he was like, "Why in the world did you cut down my tree in the yard? That's not your tree. That was my tree. And when this is your house, then it's a different story. But guess what? It's not yours. It's mine." And
right.
the tree was going to fall in the house, but I couldn't tell him because he wasn't going to listen to me. But I was so happy, Rafi, that he bitched at me and screamed at me. I just loved it. I actually smiled. It's the first time when my dad screamed at me like that it made me feel really good, because I knew he was getting better. And now I knew how to get him. I didn't want to get him upset with me too much, but I really gave it to me. But I see it for that. I also see it for educational programs, where you have these interactive storytelling experiences in places like schools. And, we sometimes we forget our own legacy, where seniors can share history lessons. My father used to talk about World War II, right? What it was like when he was a kid and World War II happened. And then when I looked at the Church of Latter-day Saints in the archives, and I saw the draft, my grandfather's drafted at like 43 years old to go into the military, everything started coming together. It was unbelievable, actually. And so those kind of things are really interesting.
It is, and and there's a lot of schools, and I've been working with some schools here in Toronto that have in grade 6, for example, they typically have a unit about roots and next generations, where sometimes they actually go and interview grandparents if they're still here. So there is a strong interest in using our technology as part of an educational program, and like you said, also in discussions with therapists, where the idea is you can either use it as part of an intake process. So just have a conversation with this thing, and it kind of ends up summarizing some aspects of your lived experience before you start therapy. But even more, almost like, your therapist prescribes, before our next appointment, I want you to talk about these 3 topics, and listen and hear how that sounds to you, and then let's come back and talk about this, right? So as part of a process with a therapist, so.
Another thing is, it's interesting because if you look at it, if you take what you've done, and then you talk about Holocaust survivors, but taking spaces where they can share their experiences, so somebody can win, veterans or Holocaust or diaspora communities, where they can actually talk about things that are history, right? That you'd never get a chance to get right from the horse's mouth, right from somebody who's lived it. I mean, there's one thing to talk about the Holocaust. There's another thing about being in one of those lines in some awful situation where people are doing not nice stuff. It's awful. What I mean? And I remember, I remember with my grandfather talking about his experiences in the war. And I remember my father talking about his experiences, and, it brings it to life. It almost like, it's not like some distant story anymore when somebody that you love has been involved in it. It's like, man, it becomes real fast, real fast.
100%. It becomes real, and you want to hold on to it. You want to be able to examine this from different, and you want to be able to ask questions, not just the event. So that happened. Well, how did you deal with it? Like, what did you learn from it?
Yeah.
How can we make sure that something like this doesn't happen again? Do you
Yeah.
still have hope? Do you still have hope and faith? Like those things that connect to the actual story. But my hope is that something like StoriedLife helps having those types of conversations and deeper connection between people.
Did you ever have those conversations with your dad?
Yeah, and I still do. And the funny thing he always, it's probably a protective mechanism for him. He always prefers to tell the funny stories. But when he's alone, then he starts talking about the other stuff too. And then I can go back and expand on it. But it's really the psychology behind it is just fascinating, of how people use the product. I've never had I think it's Buffett that mentioned it. You usually want to invest in products and companies where clients have an emotional connection to the brand, and it is fascinating to see how quickly, this is not an app, this is not a platform, it's a companion, it's about their personal experience. It's the phone is not important almost in this whole process. The psychology is really what's important here.
Well, I want to say we're coming to the top of my show here. Thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedule, Rafi, to join us. We appreciate it. And, thanks for sharing your journey with StoriedLife. The platform is absolutely getting ready to make a difference, and is making a difference, but is also ready to take off. And I'm sure seniors just need to try it to appreciate, how incredible it truly is. Because you're right. Once those memories are gone, I know there's questions I wanted to ask my mother, that I never got a chance to ask her. And there's nobody around that can answer those questions. Or like when I went into the archives in Utah in Salt Lake City, there's things I found that I wish I would have known a long time ago. Nobody told me these things, and it's amazing to me.
Yeah.
I didn't know my grandmother came over to this country when she was 10 years old, and she spoke French, and Arabic and Greek, but and didn't speak English. I didn't know that, and it wasn't, and I didn't know that her parents weren't married, and they had got married later. Now that was pretty interesting.
Yes. You find out the dirty laundry. Every family has the dirty laundry.
The dirt. I'm not sure if they're going to tell the dirt, though. I bet you wouldn't have told me, especially in that era. But anyhow, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. And thanks to all of you for joining one more time. GSD Presents Silicon Valley AI and Tech. My name is Gary Fowler, and I'm your host. Rafi, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can check our website, StoriedLife.ai, and you can also reach me directly by email, Rafi, Rafi, at StoriedLife.ai.
That's excellent. Again, stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy. And my name is Gary Fowler. I'm your host. We'll be back to you again soon with another exciting edition. Thanks, everybody. Take care and have a fantastic weekend.
Thank you.